Hey everyone, welcome to Pop XP. And before the show starts, make sure to click that subscribe button and click the bell to get notifications when we go live and we upload awesome new content. And don't forget, if you can, make sure to share our stream on all your social media outlets. We appreciate it, and thanks for helping us grow the Pop XP channel.
I am Dracula.
Well, what do you want? If it's trouble, go away. I've trouble enough.
Crazy to know who I am, aren't you? I tell you, I will prove kinship with the ape.
Hello, everybody. Billy Tucci here. Good evening and happy Devil's Night, which I believe is the night before Halloween, Halloween Eve. Well, I am your host, Billy Tucci, and I am joined by a very special co-host this evening. It is my co-writer. Well, not the co-writer. He is the writer of Return of the Warrior, and he is also the writer of next month's upcoming Haikyo. But many of you may know him as a writer of film, television, and theater. He's probably best known for writing Lionsgate's The Cat's Meow, starring Kirsten Dunst, for legendary director Peter Bogdanovich. As a horror film historian, he's done commentary tracks for Hammer Films' Hound of the Baskervilles, Hush Hush Sweet Charlotte, and The Mad Magician with Vincent Price. His acclaimed debut graphic novel, Stoker and Wells, is now currently on Indiegogo with all new exclusive perks. So without further ado, or don't, as our 7th grade English teacher, Dr. Morrissey, used to say, ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to introduce Mr. Stephen Peros.
Hello, Billy, and hello, everybody. For my favorite holiday of the year, Halloween. Billy, cheers to you, sir.
Happy Halloween, yes.
I'm all prepared in my my Ghostbusters gear to do battle with Tom Cruise in Interview with a Vampire, apparently.
And I'm the Ursax Tom Cruise from Interview with a Vampire. But I think I'm Prince or James Mason on an acid trip.
I think you're looking good, my friend. I think you're looking fine.
Well, Cary Grant did have some acid trip. Was it?
Well, he did. He did. Yeah. Back then, it was okay. In fact, I would dare say today it's okay.
He was in charge here.
Thinking of what's okay, welcome to A Century of Horror. This is episode 3. As Billy and I take you on a tour of movie horror. We began at the dawn of cinema. We worked our way through the silent era. We thought we would do a decade per episode, but there was just too much. Initially, we thought we'd divide the 1930s from 1930 to 34, and then do a second half starting with the major year of 35, Bride of Frankenstein and many other films to the end of the 30s. Well, we tried to do that about 2 weeks ago. We tried to do 1930 to 34, and we were actually fairly economic in the amount of time we spoke about films, but it was just impossible. We had so much to share, so much to move through, so many films that could not be ignored. And people were writing in the comments that this was incredible. It was like a master class, but also a lot of fun because, you know, we're having a couple of drinks and making some jokes along the way.
Indeed.
So we covered, we were going to do an episode of what they call pre-code horror, pre-code being just before Catholic League of Decency got a hold of Hollywood and politicians and said, no more, none of this. There were sort of loose regulatory codes throughout Hollywood, but throughout the 20s and early 30s, you found an abundance of not just sexual innuendo, just so much sexual content, violence, horrific images. Things were dialed down a little bit at times, but in late 1934, early 35, the hammer came down, and so you find films much more daring, bawdy, violent, involving areas of depravity and strange thought, things that go to the dark side, more in the 20s and early 30s. So we were covering that in this period up till 34, end of 34. So we only got to end of 32.
Yes,
So we're going to cover 33 and 1933, 1934 on this show, which only means King Kong, The Invisible Man, The Black Cat. So many incredible films we're going to cover today. You're going to hear more about Fay Wray than you ever thought possible.
Yes.
But let's bring out our guests, our incredible panel that we have on this show. We have 3 people who were on previously and 1 new guest. So let me start with our veterans. I want to introduce Stan Taffel, 3-time Emmy-winning actor, but he's also a motion picture and television archivist and historian, sitting in the midst of his archive up in Idlewild, California. He's the president of the Cinecon Classic Film Festival, the nation's longest-running classic motion picture festival. It's held at no less a historic theater than the Egyptian Theater here on Hollywood Boulevard, courtesy of the American Cinematheque.
Yes.
This year, they went virtual over Labor Day weekend. Every year they do it over Labor Day weekend. They went virtual and drew a record-breaking virtual audience of over 20,000 people. Welcome,
Wow.
Stan. Hello, how are you, sir?
Hello, Stan. I prematurely punctuated the tab. But
that's all right. You could prematurely punctuate anytime you like, Billy.
Thank you.
Next, we'd like to bring into the room Justin Humphreys. He is a writer, a film historian, a curator. His latest book is the Rondo Award-winning The Dr. Phibes Companion. He did another great book, Interviews Too Shocking to Print. Correct me when he comes on if it's the wrong title, which are both extraordinary books. His next is George Pal, Man of Tomorrow.
Nice.
The very first authorized biography of George Pal, who was the great, of course, a pioneer of bright body Technicolor sci-fi from the 1950s, War of the Worlds, When Worlds Collide. So many wonderful, wonderful films. Please welcome Justin Humphreys.
Hello,
Cheers,
Justin.
gentlemen. Cheers,
Hello,
cheers.
how
Hello,
are you?
everybody.
Wonderful to see you,
And
sir.
I thought I'd celebrate in a ultra tacky Count Floyd style with a plastic skull cup, of course.
I love it.
There
Wait a minute here. Love that.
Ooh.
Very
There
nice.
we go. Happy Halloween.
I'd like to bring on our third of our 4 guests, Perry Shields. He's a lifelong Monster Kid actor, director. He's portrayed Universal makeup legend Jack Pierce. That's the man who did all the makeups that we now have iconically revered throughout the decades for Frankenstein monster, the Wolfman, the Mummy. He's portrayed him at conventions and industry events. He's been the theater MC at every Monster Palooza. But one since 2010, Monster Palooza is the wonderful, wonderful convention they have yearly in the Valley here in Los Angeles. That really celebrates classic monsters, makeups, as well as contemporary monsters and makeups. It's not about comics or any other elements of pop culture, really. It's really about the films. He runs Facebook groups focusing on Universal horror with members, over 20,000 members. He currently teaches high school drama and film appreciation class in Los Angeles. Will you welcome the great man himself, Perry Shields?
Yes, Perry.
Hello, sir.
Hey,
Welcome
Perry.
to the show for the very.
Hang on.
I love it. Love it. Your microphone's off, Perry. There we go.
He likes silent films.
There we go. This was I picked this up about 12 years ago by the late makeup artist Michael Thomas, who made these. Actually took frame grabs from Frankenstein and used them as the basis for those labels, which are as authentic as you can make them. And bonus, it actually has an abnormal brain inside.
Look at that.
So, how do we know it's abnormal?
Well, the convolutions on the as opposed to that of the normal brain. Yes.
Wonderful,
there we go.
Wonderful.
Excellent.
And I thank you for the answer. And I'd like to introduce our 4th and final guest, Tracy Mercer, who by day is a TV and film executive and producer who first worked in development capacity, including on Ang Lee's Hulk, Aeon Flux, Invictus, before working her way up to producing the Diane Keaton Morgan Freeman film 5 Flights Up. She also served as a producer on the CBS hit Madam Secretary and Discovery Science's Through the Wormhole with Morgan Freeman. She's currently working on bringing Dan Curtis's iconic Dark Shadows back to television in a sequel series for Warner Brothers TV. But by night, she's the fangirl whose life changed when she saw Alien in 3rd grade, and she still can't get enough of midnight movies and horror films, and perhaps she still collects far too many action figures. Her favorite new addition is, and I worship her for this, Tom Atkins, Detective Ray Cameron from Fred Decker's Night of the Creeps. Will you welcome Tracy Mercer, the one and only?
Woo! Hey, everybody. Yeah, we got to get some Tom Atkins love wherever we can. Come on.
Atkins for the win.
Atkins
For the win.
always for the win. Thrill me. I love this guy.
If you grew up in the 80s, he was like your beloved uncle if you liked horror movies.
Well, he actually got it on. I mean, like, I think Jamie Lee Curtis jumped into bed with him in like 5 seconds in the fog. I mean, he had it going on.
Can we see that action figure, Tracy, again?
Pardon?
Can you see the figure again?
Oh, yeah.
Oh, look at that.
So
Look
good.
at that.
Anatomically accurate. That's what I want to know.
The beer can actually says Decker, as in Fred Decker, right? So it's a nice little fan detail we got going on there.
Well, yeah, I was late to the party with Night of the Creeps, and I have to say it is truly it's certainly one of the best of the 80s, and it's one of the most enjoyable of that underestimated difficulty of fusing horror and comedy. And if anyone knows how difficult it is, just watch how many bad ones are out there. And it's really, really glorious. He's wonderful in it. He's great in that. He's of course great in Halloween 3: Season of the Witch. We've discussed on another network. But yes, welcome Tracy. Welcome to this group of very learned people, and I know we're going to have a good time today. So. We are we're picking up where we left off. We ended in 1932. We ended in, let me get my, here we go. We ended with The Mummy, which came out December 22nd, 1932. And we're sort of walking through this chronologically just to get a feel of, sometimes we talk about history and it's sort of unattached to time. And I think if we're going to talk about developments, it's important to talk about these, in a certain sequence. By the time we get to the start of 1933, we talked about how Universal had this runaway hit with Dracula, just this incredible hit, and they wanted to repeat it. They started developing Frankenstein and Murders in the Rue Morgue simultaneously. Contrary to popular belief, Lugosi actually, despite his protestations, he was going forward to make it. There were makeup tests done. He was always complaining about it. It was a different director. And when they decided to replace that director with James Whale said, you know what, this is the version they were developing. He was just a pure monster, evil through and through. And I see sympathy, I see humanity in the monster. And that's where he found this then unknown Boris Karloff. And Lugosi went on and made Murders in the Rue Morgue. But the reason I'm setting this up is that 32 was a funky year. We didn't really get to hit on this. But as 32 was drawing to an end, there was worries that this horror trend was not quite going to last. That already from breakout huge box office of Dracula, Frankenstein, Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, they were getting just good returns on The Mummy, just okay returns on The Old Dark House, just okay box office on some of these titles. Murders in the Rue Morgue with starring Lugosi was not necessarily the hit they wanted it to be. The Mummy was not as huge a hit as Dracula and Frankenstein was. So we get a little bit more caution. We get the independents coming into it, which starts our first film, and one of, I think, 3 or 4 movies that we'll wind up talking about. The busiest gal in horror at this time, Fay Wray, The Vampire Bat, with Lionel Atwill, that came out in January 1933 from Majestic, an independent label. Stan, what can you tell me about these independent production companies that were trying to compete with the big studios back then? People think independence only came around in the 1970s. Those who have an armchair understanding of film history. What was it like to be an independent trying to market it, get a film out there like The Vampire Bat?
It was harder to get films released in major circuits, like independents, like the Hal Roach Studios was an independent releasing through another company. And when you get a small company like Poverty.
Yep. You better.
Can you hear me?
Yep.
You have Poverty Row Studios. They did things on a shoestring budget. The best thing that ever happened to Lionel Atwill was The Vampire Bat, because it was an independent, Warner Brothers took notice, and all of a sudden in 1933, he probably had the best year of almost any actor, because his films are remembered and revered today. And
you're right. Yeah, you're right. The first 3 films from February and March as well star Lionel Atwill. They are A Mystery of the Wax Museum by Michael Curtiz, who would then go on to to direct. But what's interesting, Vampire Bat has a lot of tropes. It's we have a lot of films. The Universal films, except for Old Dark House, didn't really go into this Agatha Christie-ish territory that so many of them were insistent on. There would always be multiple suspects and houses and things, and Universal stayed away from that with like maybe one or two exceptions. Vampire Bat kind of goes that way. Who's the killer and the big reveal at the end of who the mystery is. Dwight Fry is kind of clearly hired to rekindle the madman he played so wonderfully in Dracula and Frankenstein, and he is a red herring at one point. And Fay Wray, who's one of the few actresses in Hollywood whose scream did not have to be redubbed because it was so extraordinary. She's wonderful in this. She's wonderful in our next film, which is Mystery of the Wax Museum. Have any of you seen this extraordinary Warner Brothers Archive Blu-ray that has come out, this restoration, which is just
beautiful, just beautiful.
And we got to give credit once again, and it's good to mention names of restorationists.
Please.
But Scott McQueen at UCLA Film and Television Archive, he's the guy that is in charge of putting these things out like that. And of all of the 2-color Technicolor films I have seen, this one and King of Jazz, and this one's actually the best looking 2-color because they stayed true to what 2-color Technicolor was. They didn't over enhance it to give it more color. It looks fantastic. They went frame by frame digitally and removed every piece of dirt and every line possible. And the soundtrack's extraordinary. And it also holds a record. I think it's the first Warner Archive DVD title that actually they underestimated how it would sell, and it sold out in the first few weeks.
Mm-hmm. I know it was probably like they probably did an initial run of 3,000 or something. I mean, what usually you do something like that? That's amazing. Yeah. No, the fans collect. We all know we are all here and guilty, and we have no interest in going to self-help groups to solve this problem because it's not a problem.
No.
So let's talk about the pre-code elements of Mystery of the Wax.
Now, Stephen, I have a quick video that I could play, and I wanted to cue it up, but it said episode 2.
Yeah.
And that's why I stopped playing it in that little snag we had at the beginning of the show. Would you like me to show that little video that Niall put together of the pre-code Hollywood? It says episode 2 on it, but it has like with King, it's sex, skiing, and perversion, and it's
that I put together. That we can save till later. We can go further along on that. Tracy, I'd love to know what, and we're going to jump around. I mean, we'll get to it, but I'm wondering, in terms of the 30s horror, because I've heard a lot from these fellas over the last 2 episodes. I'd love to know what ones leap out at you. What are the ones that you gravitate towards of 1930s horror?
Right. Well, I have to say, one of the things I love is how many kind of fast-talking, spitfire, kind of sassy, female reporters there seem to always be. There's always a reporter somewhere, and then kind of I love seeing that. And Fay Wray, the original Scream Queen. I mean, all respect to Jamie Lee, but it was so fun watching these films back to back.
Yeah.
Kind of a very young Fay Wray doing her thing. What was interesting to me about it was that, there's definitely the tropes. They're mostly there to be saved. They're mostly there to be, to scream. But occasionally you'll have some saucy interaction, where they're being very, flirty and flagrant. Just like I think, and when I think of pre-code, I go to the barber stand with movies like Babyface, Ladies They Talk About, Interns Can't Take the Money, those kinds of things. So to see those kinds of women in horror where they have that agency, in addition to having to run, fall, be chased, and abducted, it's a nice mix of the genres for me. And I think that I've always felt that horror gets unfairly kind of demonized. It's like there's porn and then horror. And I actually think, especially for women, historically, you get great parts in these quote-unquote exploitation films that you don't always get perhaps in the big studio pictures, and it's like you look at something like Jamie Lee in the original original Halloween, and it's like she kicks ass, but her first big studio movie, she's taking off her shirt, she's playing a hooker. You're like, okay.
right.
Exploited where, right? So, but I always feel it started back with these early films, and they're just gorgeous. I was really struck by the cinematography and a lot of films that we're about to talk about, and I thought The Mystery of the Wax Museum was particularly great. I mean, obviously, there's a lot of channeling of the 25 Phantom of the Opera going on right down to the reveal. Beautiful makeup. But I thought it was a really great performance. And that 2-color, that 2-strip color, it gives it another earthly look to it that really made it pop.
Yeah.
And that stood out to me more than some of the other films, perhaps just on a visual level, investing.
Yeah, no,
And
it's wonderful. I'm sorry, go ahead, Stan.
In the television package of the 50s, the Mystery of the Wax Museum was released to TV in black and white. It was until the 80s that some of us got to see it in two color for the first time.
Yeah, wow.
It changes the movie.
Yeah, for those of you who are watching from the top of the show, in the opening clip, you would have seen someone pounding on someone's face and it cracked apart, and there was a scarred face underneath. That's two-strip Technicolor, and that's Mystery of the Wax Museum. Perry?
Yeah, and this might be false memory, but I recall in the 70s seeing Mystery of the Wax Museum on TV in two-strip Technicolor. Would that have been possible?
It would be possible, because I know that I saw King of Kings. I was down in the basement. I was a little kid, Channel 13, New York, and they were showing the silent King of Kings, right? That's the silent movie.
Yeah.
And suddenly I'm watching the stone rolls back and Jesus comes out and it's in color. I didn't know two-strip. I just know it's color. And I remember going upstairs in the basement to some party going on and telling everyone, I just was watching a silent movie and it was in color. And of course, people say, yeah, no, sorry, it wasn't in color. I was like, I didn't make it up. It was in color. And no one believed me. No one believed me that it was silent. So yeah, somehow Channel 13 PBS got a hold of some of these original prints because they must have been running. Justin?
Yeah, I remember the first time I saw it was when I was about 10 on TBS. On Ted Turner's TBS. And that was right about the time he was really, really, really rolling out colorization. And I remember seeing it and going, is this colorized? You know, because because I think they may have sweetened the color or something like that. But I'm glad Tracy brought up the other pre-code movies, because I've been going back and watching a lot of the non-horror pre-code stuff in preparation for this. And the women's parts in them are absolutely fantastic. And the women in them are kick-ass spitfires. And Glenda Farrell should have had such a bigger career. She's one of those comics like Lee Tracy that is just so charismatic and so strong. But I think another reason that Mystery of the Wax Museum stands out to me is the art direction by Anton Groth, I think. That worked with Curtiz many times on Seahawk and the Sea Wolf and all sorts of stuff. It has that great deco look, that wonderful kind of deco look. And it's I think if you love pre-code movies, it's really easy to love Mystery of the Wax Museum, because you have the kind of modern Gothic horror plus the newspaper element with, you know, Frank McHugh and Glenda Farrell and all that, and it's just a wonderful film.
Yeah, I mean they're very fun together. Apparently, all the Frank McHugh scenes, because he's only at that desk. You know, I think they shot those scenes out in 2 days, if not one. But especially because of the speed by which they spoke. But she was wonderful, because one of the great things which had to change after code came in, no longer could you walk into a police station after the code was enforced and see cops just lounging around, not doing anything. And she just walks right into this room of men with absolutely no problem, total confidence, picks up essentially a porno magazine one of them is reading, which the camera shows, of course, not actual nudity, but we all know what the magazine is. And she says, how's your sex life? That is a phrase that would not be uttered for 20 years on American screens because the code came in. So yeah, she's quite delightful in the film, and it is kind of surprising that she didn't have more. I personally prefer Dr. X to Murders in the Rue Morgue. I just think it's a personal taste. It's more lurid. It's more bizarre. Maybe because the tropes of Mystery of the Wax Museum have continued to be repeated, whereas Dr. X is just so in its own weird planet. And they don't have a beautiful restoration, but they have a decent DVD that Warner's put out that I enjoyed for our last show. Tracy?
Yeah, it's funny because watching this version of the Wax Museum, because I grew up with the Vincent Price one, so this was a new one for me to kind of see, and the idea that Michael Curtiz directed it is incredible to me. But I had recently just discovered The House That Dripped Blood, the Hammer film, and the Peter Cushing version, you know, where he goes into the Wax Museum, clearly is referencing this version.
Yeah.
Wax Museum. I mean, he has Salome. This guy's hung up on Marie Antoinette, but the way it's shot, I thought, Hammer was a fan of this version, you know, and it was a loving tribute to that. I thought, this is cool.
No,
by the way, just so you know, based on the amazing success of Mystery of the Wax Museum, they've restored Dr. X and they're doing the same release.
And especially the business it did. I'm thrilled. I can't wait to get that synthetic flesh. I can't wait. Oh, it's my love of that film probably signals too closely, my dark side. I'm sorry to say here on public radio. So we go now to a film.
Wait, Justin has something to say.
Justin, sir.
Very, very quickly. No, I was just going to say that as far as I know, that whole bodies hidden in a wax figure trope started with Mystery of the Wax Museum, right? Because that's been used so many times subsequently in so many different. I mean, Carry On Screaming and House of Wax, and so much stuff. And actually, I asked Chuck Griffith that wrote Bucket of Blood. I was like, had you seen Mystery of the Wax Museum or House of Wax? And he said he hadn't seen either. So I don't know if it was Gorman that originally suggested the idea for Bucket of Blood. I don't know, but that is like one of the most abiding, beloved horror tropes.
No, but I was about to ask Stan until I saw how he relabeled himself. Has that been on the whole show?
The whole show.
Well, thank you, Stan. Now you can't take it off.
And speaking
and I want to tell you, by the way, right over here, I have 17 release prints of Cat's Meow from all.
Oh, you're the guy.
I'm the guy.
Just real quick, Stan, your friend Lewis, who has the films and things like that, he had posted that. A question to well, first of all, he says, Tracy Mercer, your awesomeness. And then he's asking, have you ever worked with Thomas Tramontano? He designed miniatures and models for a lot of films. He did for the Aurora kits. Model kits he did.
But I love Aurora kits. I'm a huge fan. No, I love Aurora models. That's fantastic.
Oh, that's cool.
That's really cool.
Yeah, Lou, do us a favor, Lewis, so Stan can get in touch with you from your last conversation from the last show. Type your email in, if you feel okay with that. If not, send it to me and I'll send it off to him or friend him on Facebook or something, so you guys can connect from after the show. Because he has a lot of cool stuff here. He's got
stuff up on
the original first showing of Night of the Living Dead book. Signed by George Romero. I think Steve Peros would love this.
Whoa,
Steve.
Well, I'll tell you, one of and he's not doing this for no reason. One of Justin Humphreys' great gifts and expertise, and he's called upon it in this Hollywood land of ours, is to assess collections. He's worked with Bonhams. He's worked with all of the great auction houses, evaluating and assessing. That's not the right word. What's the word again? The archiving? No.
Cataloging, archiving, appraising.
Appraising. Thank you. Appraising. So yes, please reach out in any way you like through Bily. Bily will forward it. Justin Humphreys, I gather, is the only Justin Humphreys on Facebook. I could be mistaken.
There's a NASCAR driver that co-opted my name, and son
of a bitch.
No,
ride your coattails to success.
Things. I mean, he's got a full reel. Look at this, Stan. Full reel episode of the silent film show, silent film of Lazy Days or Our Gang, which became the Little Rascals.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, it's the first. Lazy Days. Oh, he's got the silent version. I think it was the first. Yeah, absolutely. By all means, contact me.
Lou, I would look. Here's his email. His email is in the chat right now, Stan, if you want to see that. All right, for the world to see.
Very good.
So if you want to write that down, it's in the chat, and you guys can connect and become Facebook friends, and I'm sure our Justin and Steve and Stan and Tracy and Perry would like some too. I'm sure we could all find good homes for your.
Well, I want to take a deep dive into the next film, and it's probably the only time I'm going to be on the show taking a deep dive into a film that I've still not seen.
Oh.
Because you cannot stream it anywhere.
Yeah.
It only exists on DVD. It is the third of 3 films in 1933. Oh, wow. Third of 3 films in 1933. Say that 3 times fast. Starring Lionel Atwill. And that is Paramount because, Universal kicked this off. And Warner's, MGM, to some extent Fox, and Paramount. Paramount had a hit too. Probably had the second biggest hit, arguably, of everybody, which is Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, which won an Oscar. But now Paramount was at it again. We covered in the last show, after Jekyll and Hyde, they did Island of Lost Souls based on H.G. Wells's Island of Dr. Moreau, which was banned in the UK, was considered absolutely abhorrent, which is why we love it. And actually, it is an extraordinary film. It really is an extraordinary film. But they didn't dabble again until 33. That's their third of their horror output, which is Murders in the Zoo. And I know now, this is a man whose lips have been stitched closed. This close-up exists in the film, and it's not fleeting. This is the kind of image you would not see in Hollywood movies for, at least, I would say about 20 years, maybe until things like Mr. Sardonicus came around. But even then, not so much. It's about a very nasty man named Lionel Atwill's character, who uses animals and it's to seek revenge. But Stan, you've probably screened this at Cinecon, yes?
I love this movie. I think the opening scene where the climax is that poor guy, because he kissed Lionel Atwill's wife in some affair, that scene is probably the scariest scene of the whole pre-code horror era for me personally.
The opening scene is up there on YouTube. Yeah. He's like doing some stitching just out of frame, and his sound effects are awful. And he leaves this guy to rot, and he gets on his horse and rides away. And then this man just stumbles out of the woods and goes right into the camera. Yeah. And it's like, what is this? Is this 1983 or 30? Where are we?
Yeah, I think his hands and legs were tied, and he couldn't yell, and that's because the doctor wanted a lion or some jungle beast to rip him apart, which eventually we know happened.
Yeah. And so tell us more about what is the general plot of Murders in the Zoo? Yeah.
Well, there are two plots. One plot is he's working with animals to try to find serums and cures for things, but the other plot is his wife, who loves to fool around on the side, is fooling around with people. And as it turns out, she's fooling around with Lionel Atwill's medical assistant, who found the cure for the serum, but Lionel Atwill doesn't know that. And then when he gets the guy infected with the poison, he basically saves himself. But you have Charlie Ruggles for the most incredible comic relief.
Now, does the wife get punished for having committed adultery in this film?
No.
See, that's what also changed.
It's free code.
It's free code because if you were a woman and a man, actually, and you cheated in your marriage, doesn't matter if it was with an evil guy against an evil husband like Lionel Atwill. I'm sorry, I'm pointing at you, Stan. You're not an evil. I hope you're not anyway. But it didn't matter. You had to be. That was part of the rules, and that's one of the wonderful things. You see women behaving as they choose to behave in movies in 30, 31, 32, 33, even a little bit in 34. Everybody who cheated didn't necessarily, sometimes they did it because they had horrible relationships. It was complicated like life. It was filled with gray like life. But the code came in and said, nope, if you cheat, you must be punished. If your script has someone, we won't censor that you have someone who cheats in the movie. They must be punished at the end. We won't, if you have someone who's a criminal, it's okay. They must be killed at the end. They must be jailed at the end.
But you also have to know, in this movie, even though Lionel Atwill is clearly the main lead, Charlie Ruggles gets top billing, and he's just the comic relief.
Wow, I had no idea. That's so bizarre.
Right. And as far as his wife getting punished, she did have to endure Randolph Scott as her love interest. So,
that's not so harsh, I think. I don't think Randolph was really secretly into her, but they looked great together.
Tracy, did you find a way to see Murders in the Zoo?
I did actually.
Tell me, because I still haven't seen it.
No, I've seen, this is one of the few I was like, I've seen this one. Because I remember a boa constrictor scene that gave me nightmares. That's upsetting. And I don't know what the mechanical head snake thing is. There's a lot of disturbing images. Like, to me, I didn't know that there was really a plot as much as there's a really jealous guy who tortures the lovers of his wife, and it just feels like, can't you get a divorce? It's like there's another way to work this problem, But
he's got it's a snake head, and then he uses the snake head to bite people.
with the venom that kills it. It's just like upsetting. But I like what you're saying, Steve, because one of my all-time favorite noirs. I know we're jumping ahead, but like I never bought that Stanwyck's Phyllis Dietrichson wouldn't get away with it. So when Kasdan kind of redoes it as body, I go, exactly. Maddie Walker is on the beach. Just Stanwyck would have been, except the code. The code stops Stanwyck from being Stanwyck.
I know. Jump in here.
Yeah, no, I was going to say it was fascinating watching, for instance, like Night Nurse with Stanwyck, because it ends with, and I'll spoiler ahead, her bootlegger boyfriend murders the guy that's making her life hell, and they drive off happily, and it's like murder solves their problems. The end. I mean, that didn't happen again for a long, long, long time, and it's really wonderful because the prick deserves to die. I mean, it's like they're doing the world a service. So, I mean, the bootleggers were the most likable characters in the movie. So again, it's gray areas. It's not simplistic.
So what I'd like to do before going on, Billy, why don't you run? I think we put a couple of montages together, and I think this montage in particular is a montage. We did a montage about violence. No, we did about sex, and then we did one about violence. Which one is this, Billy? Violence
This is
and torture?
Pre-Code Horrors.
That's not the opening one, is it?
Well, I think it is.
Wait, hold on. Do you have a time code for that one,
is
Billy?
it. Yep, I know. Yeah, I have the one that you're looking at was the one that we used in our opening.
There should be one the same exact link. You would start at 5 minutes 37 seconds and go to 7 minutes 8 seconds.
All right, let me give me a second. I see it. At what time? 5 minutes 37 seconds.
Yeah, and then end at 7 minutes.
I can go a little early. There's a little Lost World in there. You want to see what I watched?
No, it shouldn't be Lost World in there. No.
Not Lost
just
World.
run this. Just run this.
Most Dangerous Game. It looks like.
That's fine. This is all torture and violence in pre-code horror. We put this montage just to show how twisted these films were.
Yep. All right. Let's let me share it. Give me a second.
You can mute yourselves if you like.
Yes, please. I believe that's it. And let's give it a go.
Fellow white man, no.
Oh, I'm sorry. Let me make big.
Something to write home about. A nice bedtime story for the kids too, if they want it.
Come back soon, won't you?
It's nothing. Nothing. Somebody's being tortured. Are you in pain, mademoiselle? It will only last a little longer.
Oh, you're hurting me! No!
That's how I learned how to swim.
My little bride.
Oh my God. Oh.
You're vivisecting a human being. You're cutting a living man to pieces. Did you ever see an animal skin? That's what I'm going to do to you now. Tear the skin from your body. Slowly. Bit by bit. How does it feel to hang on your own embalming rack, Yama? Heresy. Heresy. They still burn men for heresy. Then burn me, monsieur. Light the fire. Oh, in the name of God, I know it feels.
Billy, yes, I think we're okay. We can move off.
All right.
There's it. Yes. We went. There we go.
Bravo.
So
Yes.
it's nice to know that that Kong plays no race card. He'll eat anybody. He'll eat every single race, gender, doesn't matter. And these are scenes that were in 1933, but as Stan will attest to, were literally removed from prints after the code came in. Isn't that right, Stan?
Yes, and it took 30 years for them to actually find the footage. It was cut out of the original negative as well. So for all subsequent re-releases, they didn't even have it to be used.
Wow.
But it was somewhere, I believe, in the late 60s in France that they found the footage and was able to reassemble it.
Huh. And for the viewers here, because now we're going to start talking about literally my favorite movie of all time, King Kong. But for those of you who were wondering, there are a lot of stuff in there that you saw, and you're like, I don't know what's racy about that. This is, I don't quite know. But you have to understand that once the code came in, you no longer saw a woman's décolletage, as the French say. That we no longer saw, there is no longer low-cut clothing of any kind for a good 15, 20 years on movie screens. Women's clothing was cut up to here. So when they show Fay Wray running through the woods, there was a reason that clip was part of that sex, image of sex in the 20s. I mean, in pre-code, because even that was no longer allowed. So it's kind of fascinating to watch the things we take for granted now, to know that for 20 years they were off movie screens until really, what is it? The code sort of died out like the Burgermeister in the Rankin Bass Santa Claus. You realize
Right. Yeah, I think that's pretty much what happened. I mean, and I love that how it's the same shot from The Most Dangerous Game and King Kong.
Yeah. Well, same director. He just copied himself.
Yeah, as a brunette and then as a blonde with even less clothing.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm sure it did. I'm sure one director, it might have been a Curtiz or someone said, I'm not doing this. The hell with that.
Well, yeah. So last week, 2 weeks ago, last episode, we spoke about Most Dangerous Game, 1932, released in 32, but it was really being shot simultaneous to King Kong on a lot of the same sets. Most iconically, there's a very brief moment with a run across the famous log scene from King Kong with Fay Wray. And now this makes, now that we're talking about King Kong, we are now talking about this is now our third Fay Wray movie that we're talking about. King Kong was released nearly a year after.
Just if I may, I'm sorry, I just have to show this. Look at that.
Yeah, no, it's beautiful. This is a King Kong image. Yeah, this is a King Kong image because of the special effects, the post-production special effects of King Kong. It wasn't released until nearly a full year later. But this is an extraordinary film. Audiences at that time, they did not, in a way, they did not deserve the level. They were not expecting the level of sophistication of the special effects that were happening here. When you start to realize just how much they were doing on multiple planes in a given image, audiences they were, and the reason why we're talking about it in a horror show and why we see it listed in so many books on horror, when one watches it today and thinks, well, it's a adventure film and a fantasy film, it's not really a horror movie, is it? Audiences were frightened when they saw this movie. King Kong scared them.
Yeah.
The peril that Fay Wray was in was frightening because they believed it. It was happening.
I mean, this shot alone, if I may just add this, I mean, like, we should look how just terrifying. Remember, even when he comes leering at Fay Wray when she's hanging on the, when she's suspended on the racks and just he's, I mean, just. I could just imagine what it must have been like in 33, and you sit next to John Dillinger, and even he was afraid.
Well, yeah, I was watching. I remember I always watched. There's a scene where he just comes into his cave, the cave that will eventually be where he goes out to the landing where the pterodactyl will come. And I said, they are doing so much more here than the audience. The audience would have accepted so much less. It's like a foreground little river, and then there's smoke in the fore, and there's so much going on that the care and love to immerse you in a world, I think, is one of the reasons why I don't think it is the quote unquote greatest film ever made. It's certainly my favorite film because it's awe-inspiring for me. Justin?
I think you're absolutely right. There's something about the cave you were talking about and the jungle and a lot of that stuff, especially on Skull Island, that's literally like an illustration come to life. It's like a J. Allen St. John illustration or a Gustave Doré illustration or something come to life. There's something magical and otherworldly about it. it's not literal reality. There's something truly magical about it. And you're talking about the frightening quality of the movie. I think what's so scary about it is Kong is very sympathetic, like a lot of the great monsters are, but he reacts like an actual animal. He kills like an animal. If you attack him, he will kill you. And he is so realistic, which makes him so much more frightening. Like there's that great moment where he's killed the T-Rex and he monkeys with its jaw.
Yeah.
Like a kid would.
Yeah.
The Gene Warren, the great animator, used to talk about how animation wasn't about being perfect. It was about giving it the breath of life. And Kong has the breath of life, as do the other dinosaurs in it. It's really extraordinary.
Well, and if you look at Willis O'Brien's illustrations from it, just think about, as an artist, you could draw on paper. And what?
I said they're extraordinary, yeah.
Yeah, but he captured that. The scene with the Stegosaurus when they're walking, and the Stegosaurus is in the back and starts charging them. And they start firing at it and throwing things, but his illustrations that he did, his whatever they would be, production designs or whatever. He really mirrored it and matched it on the film. Like you said, it's extraordinary. It really is.
Perry, you had something you wanted to add?
Yeah, no, I'm with you. I just think this is one of the greatest films ever made. I first saw it when I was maybe 9 or 10. My dad made me sit down and watch it. It was on TV, and he said, "You have to watch this film." He was a film fan as well. But it was one of those stripped films where it played all week. So I watch it 5 times in a week. And then, but one thing I'll say about King Kong is I think from a script standpoint, it's the perfect 3-act movie. Because you've got Act 1 in New York, you've got Act 2 on Skull Island, you've got Act 3 back in New York, and it's structured so well, and it's 103 minutes. Not to get into remake territory, but the 2005 King Kong told the exact same story in almost twice that amount of time. But the 33 film is so perfectly constructed that 103. That's like the perfect length for almost a film, right?
Absolutely.
You get into giant territory where it's 3 hours and 45 minutes. You got that's a long movie, but this is just I think it's the perfectly written. It's like a textbook.
It really is. It really is. Tracy and then Stan.
Yeah, I was just going to say, to build on what Perry was saying, my dad screened King Kong for me as we were getting ready to see the De Laurentiis movie when I was a little kid. And he's like, "You got to see this because no matter what we're going to see, it won't be as good as this." And so I was very like, "Okay, Dad." And I just remember being a little girl watching King Kong for the first time. And when he died, I'm crying. Like, I was so upset. There was such emotion for that creature. And I just feel like that, Peter Jackson's a genius. Andy Serkis is a genius. But the truth is, back in the day, the original King Kong, you felt for him. And it was like this huge emotional moment. And that is something that, again, even when you get older and you can start to see like the fingerprints on the stop motion, you see some of the crap when you're older. But I just remember as a pure experience, like it was one of the most emotional films I'd ever seen.
Yes, and to build on what you said and what Justin said about the breath of life, the script, they built that moment up. It was an earned moment for the audience to feel that way, and I love that it's played without music for the most part. When he's
that gut line
until the end,
that killed the beast, you're like, ugh,
But the music comes in when he really gets injured, and then but it's just like very real, and it's incredible.
They do have the music when they first get into Skull Island, when they first go past the wall. Is that what you're going to say, Stan? I'm sorry with the.
No, it's all right. I had a whole other thing to talk about, but
Well, let me piggyback on this thought here. This is interesting because we have these sort of strange, perverse movies from this period with nobody sympathetic as the monster. Like we obviously certainly mentioned last week we talked about Dr. Moreau and Out of the Lost Souls. We just talked about Murders in the Zoo. We'll be talking about The Black Cat, but I think there's also this element of the monster film that exists today, and this whole notion in why James Whale kind of moved off Lugosi and onto Karloff is this, and why we lump in Hunchback of Notre Dame sometimes incorrectly, because this idea of the humanity in the monster, teenagers children. We know what it's. No matter what you graduated to become, whether you became the homecoming king or queen, or whether you become a quote unquote nerd, we all recognize what it's like to be misunderstood, to be thought to be something we're not, that our outbursts are interpreted incorrectly. And so whether you have Frankenstein or King Kong, later the Wolfman, some of these films that we're talking about, that's sort of this kind of common thread is fine. It's what Tim Burton always is related to in his quote unquote monster movies, is going back to this era, this idea of the monsters. Stan, did you want to add something there?
Yes.
Yeah.
Let me go back just a touch. You alluded, I think Perry and Tracy alluded to the music, and they said it's not heard a lot, but it's heard during certain things. Credit must be given to Max Steiner, who knew exactly how to score this movie and how to not score this movie. So credit to him for that.
Yeah.
Now, this is what I really want to talk about, and it's really crucial because of all of the horror films, King Kong is the one that probably resonates the most when you see it on the big screen. 87 years ago, people could only see it on the big screen. Everybody on this panel saw it on television, as we all did, and we've all enjoyed it, and we got what we could out of it. But this absolute, this is an original.
Hang on.
This is a print of King Kong. Can you see the name King Kong there?
Yeah, there it is.
It's an absolute complete 16 millimeter print, which came from 35. And when I first projected this on a big screen, I got so scared, and I'd seen King Kong 50 times before. There is something to be said for all of you who are watching right now on YouTube. King Kong is a wonderful film, but if you don't see it on a big, larger-than-life screen, this had. I bet you've seen Jaws on the big screen, and it has a similar impact because it is larger than life. And the difference between Jaws and this is that King Kong gave the emotion, whereas Robert Shaw, Richard Dreyfuss, and all of the actors gave the emotion in Jaws because the shark did not have any emotion. But this film is an absolute masterpiece, but people are not seeing it the right way when they see it on a small television.
Stan, how large of a screen are you capable of showing a 16 millimeter film? Let's say your projector or something.
Right now in this new theater, I have a 12-foot screen.
Excellent.
So I can project this 12 feet, which, and the room is no bigger than a 2.5 car garage. So 12 feet is much larger than you would think when you're in a smaller space.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, Stan is not aware of this, but next year San Diego Comic-Con, if it's on, he will be coming down showing King Kong at the Marriott. We'll rent a room, and we're going to play that, and we're going to have a little movie night.
And I'll tell you, this particular print, even though it's false, this particular print has an overture and exit music, but don't be fooled because the film never had an overture or exit music. But this film was so special that a film archivist decided to do it, and he made a few reels up, and I was one of the lucky ones to get it and splice it into the beginning and the end of the print. So it's just a showmanship. That's all it is.
I have a dupe of 16 of Kong. Stan, of course, far eclipses me in the 16 millimeter collecting department. And prints of King Kong were rampant, and I have not one nearly as glorious as what he has. But Tracy and then Justin.
Well, I have a question for Stan, because you might know this. I've for years read about, I've seen stills, but the spider pit sequence from Kong.
Yeah.
Has
Excellent, Tracy.
that ever been totally reconstructed and or found, or do we have hope, or is it still missing?
No. As a matter of fact, I mean, I honestly don't know how long the preview was when this film was previewed, and that may have been in there, but no. It's just one of the many things in film that, it's like when the legend becomes fact, it's the legend,
Yeah.
Well, I'll tell you two things about that. Number one is someone did duplicate it. I think it was Peter Jackson duplicated.
Yeah.
I'm not talking about his remake. He actually recreated what Willis McBride would have done. And second, when I first got Peter Jackson's King Kong, which I think is a mixed bag, but ultimately I liked it. I think there's a lot to like in the film. When I was watching the DVD, I actually because the spider sequence or whatever it is, the sucking of the head, it's a chapter, and if you skip the chapter, it's a better movie.
Well,
So
yeah,
they cut it for a reason. The pace of the movie suddenly just stops there, and
totally,
it
I
works
agree.
much better if we just go skip.
Yeah. 100%.
Justin, you're about to say?
Well, I was going to say I think that Kong in a lot of ways was a game changer in the movie industry because it showed that special effects technicians could be stars. I mean, it didn't resonate that way at the time, but because of you look at the effects crews on movies now, and you're sitting there in the theater for about 20 minutes watching this endless scroll. And in the case of Kong, it's just like it's like Willis O'Brien, Marcel Delgado, and a few other guys. And what they did was absolute magic. And again, like Tracy was saying about, the fingers, see the fingerprints on the rabbit fur and all that. And it's like, who cares? It's like the fingerprints on Wallace and Gromit now. It's the touch of a human hand, which you do not get in CG effects. I mean, you do not get it. But what I was going to say was the thing about O'Brien was, and that film was, it had such a gigantic impact on Ray Harryhausen. It was his favorite film. And of course he would, he proselytized for years, worked with O'Brien. And then of course, Ray in turn inspired that generation like Phil Tippett and all those other guys. And then, you have Peter Jackson and all the others that come after him. And of course it's Peter's favorite film as well. So it inadvertently changed the industry in that respect. I mean, the lead actors in it are absolutely wonderful. And of course you have one of the coolest things about it is that the Carl Denham character is basically kind of a hyperbolic version of Marion C. Cooper himself, who was a really hyperbolic human being. I mean, he was an extraordinary person.
Well, I think part of the more reading I've been doing this week in particular, the Depression did hit Hollywood, and it took a little while, but it did hit, and Universal shut down for a little while. That's part of why Karloff was able to go off and do a film in England, because there were delays, so budgets were slashed, staff was slashed. So the idea of a $650,000 movie like King Kong, which was exorbitant back then, was not something Hollywood was able to repeat at that particular time. Tracy?
One of the things I also love, just to go back to the Vampire Bat, just from a producer standpoint, I thought was so clever as just a fan of a lot of these movies. The idea that Little Poverty Row, Majestic Studios basically rented James Whale's German village from Frankenstein. The exterior and then the interior is the old dark house set. So all of a sudden they had no money, but you have young Melvin Douglas walking around in A-picture sets in this B movie that they could never have afforded that level of set. But I thought that is such a smart, it's hard for your actors, they're working at night when everyone else goes home. But what a clever way when you have no money in the Depression to level up basically like a C movie.
We're going to see that during the wartime films too, because you have these B movie mummy films, and everybody lives in a mansion, and everyone's coming down grand staircases, and you realize they're repurposing, and that's what was great about the studio system. Now we have a huge sci-fi film come in to a stage at Paramount, and they build this huge event, and then they tear it down, and then the next film comes in and builds another big sci-fi set. It's like, why didn't you guys talk? Maybe you could have, I don't know.
I just want to mention that I have never read in any original review from 1933 or 34, because King Kong played in 34. Nobody talked about the fingerprints on King Kong because no one knew what it was. We know today because we are so advanced. But back then, it just looked like a living, breathing, gigantic ape, and his hair was moving.
Right, that his hair was just moving from just being an ape. Right.
And now, unfortunately, everyone thinks that when they see the movie, they go, "Oh, look at that! That's sloppy." But we didn't know.
Well, also, it's those wonderful little touches, like I said, like monkeying with the jaw, and also where I think it's the Stegosaurus dies. There's that last convulsive movement of the tail, and apparently that took a while to animate, and it's such a great touch. I mean, it was really, really brilliant people. And as far as I want to say one thing about Bily, you brought up the artwork. O'Brien was a wonderful artist, but there were some other artists that worked on that did absolutely magnificent art. Mario Larrañaga and Byron Crabb. who worked on a lot of the RKO stuff back then. I mean, their artwork is just stunning.
Yeah,
and also the blood. The blood on the creature that Kong kills. You see the blood trickling down after he's dead. And to me, that was the scariest part of all.
Yeah, it's so real.
It's real. It's real. It's very real.
Part of the pre-code design. No, they didn't cut that out with reissued prints, but they wouldn't have approved it in its time if the film was made in late 30s. They would have said, just make sure there's no blood when he breaks the jaw of the of the animal.
One more thing I want to say. One of the scariest things to me is where he destroys the L train. Because he does it with such savage, brutal, bestial savagery, and those people are just screwed. They're done for. It's horrifying. It's like watching a plane go down. It's horrifying. And that where his head comes up over the L train, it's terrifying. It's still creepy.
Yep.
I got a question for Steve. I got a question for you. What did you think of Son of Kong?
Oh, Son of Kong is its own thing. It's like an hour. It goes real fast. It's not. What's great is it's the kind of sequel I like, which is not just a repeat of the first movie. I love seeing Down on Your Luck of Carl Denham. It's like this low budget quickie sequel to a huge hit. As a kid, I remember thinking, wait a minute. In the first movie, Kong was this big, and all the other creatures it fights are to scale. So Son of Kong is this big, and conveniently all the creatures it fights is to scale. How did that happen? So when you watch it, you realize they end load all of the creatures because it's a good 40 minutes of this 70-minute movie until Willis O'Brien's work comes in. Well, no small feat because there's only so much the man can do to get this movie out in the theaters as fast as they wanted it. I enjoy it for what it is. Robert Armstrong said he preferred it because he got to be the love interest. He got to do a lot of fun stuff performance wise.
Well,
I don't revisit it very often, I must say, but it's that they were concerned about the comic tone, so they put at the bottom of the posters a serio-comic fantasy because they were concerned after people were terrified with King Kong. Why is this one getting goofy? I mean, it literally gets goofy. He does takes to the camera. He goes like that to the camera. So they made a really weird choice suddenly after this huge monstrous terrifying hit to go to this strange comic direction. But I don't I did it. How did it do financially? I've never looked into it.
Oh, it was panned pretty much. I mean, it was such a quickie that people were disappointed. I felt bad for Helen Mack because she was a good actress, but she ended up becoming a poor man's Fay Ray.
Yeah, it's a tough act to follow. I mean, she's fun. She sings that song at the beginning. Well, you can't beat that. I was convinced they were in whatever weird island they were on before they set sail.
I'll tell you this: I was sad. I was really sad when the son died. I thought that was terrible.
Yes, it is.
With the arm, and then that I thought was even sadder than.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
It's sort of like when the Asylum does a low rent version of a huge movie. Yeah. It's sort of Son of Kong is to King Kong. It's as if a different studio did a quickie version, knockoff. Yes, Perry?
Yeah, I was going to say, Stan, when I showed my kids that film when they were little, they cried.
Mm-hmm.
So
it's powerful. The end of look, I mean, the filmmakers, these are solid filmmakers. There's no question about it. And I think it is powerful because he is ultimately cute. Son of Kong is cute, and you kind of like him. And he's fun, and he's definitely a child. And so a child is dying, saving an adult. I mean, it's kind of on a fundamental, raw level, very touching. Justin, what were you going to add?
Well, what I was going to say about Kong was one of the reasons, it's back to what Perry was saying about the beautiful structure of it. What I love about the movie is it keeps upping the ante with what it's giving the audience. It's like, it's not just you have this spectacular wall, then you have all the dinosaurs, then you have Kong fighting the dinosaurs, and keeps going and going. But that's not enough. So then they go to New York, and you have him busting out of New York. You have him tearing up in New York. It keeps upping the ante and upping the ante and upping the ante and upping the ante, and you're seeing so much more. And then, of course, the finale at the Empire State Building. It's just wonderful. I mean,
I'd like to pause for a moment, Billy. We're getting a comment on Brian Blevins saying that the Pop XP Culture Experience Facebook blocked this episode. Do you want to take a little tool around our Facebook and take a look and see what's going on. Maybe we put up an image that shocks the censors.
Universal tends to have these algorithms. If you use too much Universal, they shut you down. We had this.
We didn't use. We just used that. Oh, who cares?
I know, but they do this. It's weird.
Well, we'll repost the episode for people to see.
Yeah, we'll do that. We'll post a link and have
figure out. We'll try to solve this. Hopefully,
it just sinks. I see the little exclamation point. It sinks because so many of our viewers are Facebook people and they don't bother to come to YouTube. Well, now they're going to have to.
Well, we'll get it. We'll get it up there and running. So obviously we could do many shows, one whole show on King Kong. There's so much to talk about. Let's
Steve, if I may real quick to end this before we move on. Yeah. I just love the joy and the wonder in all of your voices when recalling Kong, and then even Son of Kong, and it brings me back to when we were kids, Steve, that every Thanksgiving they would play King Kong, right?
Oh, yeah,
and you in the New York, the metro area, New York, New Jersey, Connecticut metro area.
Channel 9.
What?
Channel 9.
Channel 9, yes. And every Thanksgiving, it was March of the Wooden Soldiers. Then it was King Kong. Then it was Son of Kong. And again, you went through the whole emotional roller coaster of Kong, and then Son of Kong. And then, of course, at the end, as you said, Steve, this child, Son of Kong, dies. And then that followed up by Mighty Joe Young. And then you're sitting there like, oh my God, is Joe gonna die now? You know what I mean? It's amazing this whole, again, just a wonderful memories. I'm getting I'm just smiling from ear to ear just thinking about it and recalling.
Oh yeah, no, I worked my Thanksgiving meal all around watching King Kong on that day. I could never dictate it. God forbid. Back then, children were not allowed to actually dictate what went on, but I kind of was willing it that I didn't have to actually interrupt watching King Kong.
It says a lot to us that we never watched. We weren't watching football. We were watching old movies.
Yeah.
Yep, that's right. Absolutely. So speaking of firsts, we talked about King Kong. We have the first slasher movie that came out from Columbia. I got to say, these other studios, Stan, who was running Paramount in Columbia at this time? Because Paramount was making some weird stuff with Murders in the Zoo. They did, obviously, Island of Lost Souls. Just around the same time as Night of Terror, the first slasher movie, which is Columbia, they did Supernatural, which is a very bizarre, not entirely successful film, but a very dark film.
Like, wow, that is such a weird thing to see her in that movie for me.
Carol Lombard in Supernatural. Yeah, we'll talk about that first because that came first. That was you're on Kong came out on April 7th. 2 weeks later, Supernatural from Paramount comes out. Victor Halperin, who is had some success with White Zombie the year before, independent with Lugosi, is now hired by the studios to do this film. Carol Lombard doing not a zany comedy, not a light on its feet tale, about an executed female murderer who comes back and possesses Carol Lombard as a screenwriter. It violates every rule, and I don't know that it necessarily proves that that's a good thing. You don't know who the protagonist is, where you're going, who you're supposed to root for, and it's a film I've revisited 3 or 4 times, and always enough space in between, remembering that it doesn't quite work, but I'm fascinated to watch it every time. Tracy, you sound like you watched it fairly recently.
I did. It makes no sense at all. But I have no idea what's going on. But again, Randolph Scott, very easy to look at. But seeing the beginning of the stars, kind of figuring out he's not at ease, she's in the wrong genre, and you just kind of have these tropes that it's such a wow. I almost love these kind of failed films more than it's interesting because they were still experimenting and trying to figure things out.
Yeah, Bily, the poster is truly one of the most beautiful posters ever from the 30s.
Yeah, where she's
that should be in the batch that I gave you. If not, feel free to.
Let me hang on.
Yeah,
but it's quite into. They showed it. I finally saw it on the big screen at New Beverly. They screened a decent print of it. Yeah, I mean, look at this glorious poster. It's so beautiful. It's such a beautiful poster. How they got Carol Lombard to do this? I mean, maybe she was just trying to spread her wings.
She did not want to be typecast, and she fought it for her entire career, even to the end of her career with Vigil in the Night. She wanted to be diverse. So.
And she's not bad in the film. It's so bizarre to see her in it, though.
Yeah. I always like when someone goes out of their comfort zone. I still feel this way about The River Wild with Meryl Streep trying to do the Sigourney thing. I'm like, nope. You're I'm not buying you in the action role. I'm not,
Right.
Well, there was a part of the time around the pre-code era that the top actresses wanted to be diverse, and you will see this in Miriam Hopkins' performance in The Story of Temple Drake. It's just, a woman who actually gets raped, and it was something that they couldn't even say, but you knew what was happening. And she wanted to do this role because it was going to show a different, no pun intended, a different side of her. But yeah, literally. And Lombard was no exception.
Yes, Justin.
And I think in the case of, like, you brought up, thank you for bringing up my fellow Virginian, Randolph Scott, Tracy. I think in the case of, like, Randolph Scott in that and in Murders in the Zoo, it's sort of like Humphrey Bogart in Return of Dr. X, where in hindsight, we look back and go, what the is he doing in this?
Yeah.
And then we realize, like, there wasn't a Randolph Scott yet. There was not the tall T, ride the high country Randolph Scott. This is Randolph Scott they're trying to figure out what the hell to do with him.
Right.
So it's very interesting seeing them in these, where they're sorting out their persona.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So yeah, one of the films that I'm late, it did not screen very often on television, and it wasn't until years later, maybe only 2 years ago, that I saw it for the first time, is this film that came out literally just days after Supernatural, which is Night of Terror for Columbia, director Ben Stoloff. Originally, it was developed under the title He Lived to Kill. This is definitely pre-code, because it is a bunch of people in a house in a town, and and this is sort of the first time we've seen this on screen, which is this idea of, not just yet, Billy, but
I know.
Yeah, is that this idea that in this story, there is somebody who is killing with glee, with absolute two-dimensional, pure evil, and that's why it's often been called the first slasher film, because there really was never a film before it or since where it was just totally a gleeful, strangely scarred, uniquely garbed killer who was always in this story of a whole bunch of people panicking, trying to figure out what are we going to do, because there's someone who just likes to stab people.
Yeah.
Nothing else. There's no backstory. There's nothing else about this guy except he is a killing machine. And one of the most frightening things about the film, say what you want, when you watch it, it's creaky, it's this, it's that. Every time this killing happens, you're like, what the hell did I just see? And then finally, just in case you're not sure what you saw, when the movie is over, and this is not a spoiler, because this will not let you know whether the killer really died or not. This is sort of a curtain speech at the very end. Now imagine now, as Stan was saying earlier, forget about looking at this computer screen. Imagine you're sitting in an audience with your popcorn, and suddenly the image you're about to see fills the 50-foot screen, and someone is looking at you, speaking to you, and it's not Peter Pan trying to get you to revive Tinkerbell. This is what you hear. Billy? Do we got it?
Oh, wait, hang on, dang it. Oh. Hang on. No problem. I'm no Nile scholar. Give me a second. I've got it. And the title of this is The Maniac from the Night of Terror. We sharing now?
Yep, go ahead.
Excellent. Terrifying.
I'm talking to you, and you, and you. If you dare tell anyone how this picture ends, if you dare reveal who the murderer is, I'll climb into your bedroom window tonight and tear your limb from limb. I'll haunt you. Good night. Sleep tight. Pleasant dreams.
I had a chef come out of the restaurant when I had a complaint. I think that was.
It's so bizarre to discover that when you watch the film.
Also, I want to give props to Wallace Ford again, the wisecracking reporter character. She's doing her Rosalind Russell shtick in this, and I'm here for it. Love her. Totally great. What a wacky movie, but also there's disparate elements, right? So there's the slasher on the loose who stabs you and then conveniently has cut out headlines from newspaper that he pins on your butt random. Yeah. And then you've got the scientist who's like, bury me alive because I'm working on this thing where you don't have to breathe. You can just totally have a serum and not breathe. And you're like, what? And then, so all that's happening. And then the cops show up and then everyone has opinions about this particular cop. And I'm like, well, he hasn't done anything wrong yet. But they're just really kind of, I don't know, watching it through a modern lens, it is interesting.
Stan, have you ever, yeah, I know, it's crazy. Stan, have you ever screened this at Cinecon with an audience?
No, I don't believe we've screened this one. And I do want to say one of the reasons why most people don't know this film and why we don't know a lot of those films from Columbia, you have to remember, RKO had their own theaters. Paramount had their own theaters. Columbia was still Poverty Row then, and they had to, get bookings at lesser known, smaller venue theaters. And that's
right.
So, for instance, It Happened One Night was considered a failure until word of mouth many months later, and then other theaters were picking it up. And that's the film that actually started the trajectory for Columbia. So,
Oscar. Yeah.
Right. Oh. Frank Capra had felt he'd been demoted and like, oh, I got to do a picture of Columbia. Jeez, it's like doing a picture for the asylum. I don't want to do that, and so he did, and you're right. He rechristened it a major player.
It's interesting, when you think about it. And I had a friend do a lot of research on this, and it staggers me. But the Laurel and Hardy films that they made in their heyday in the late 20s and 30s, they did fairly well. Their biggest money makers were the Fox features they made in the 40s, which are generally considered the inferior product, but they had many more theaters to see it, and it was during a war, so people just went. So it's misleading how well they did. Same with these early Columbia potboilers that did not have an audience. So Get TV was running these things for a while because it was a Sony-owned channel. I wish they would continue to run these films, and the reason why it survives in such good condition is because Grover Crisp is the head of restoration at Sony.
Yeah.
And Grover, I got to mention his name because a lot of these films would have deteriorated and we wouldn't have good quality prints anymore.
Oh, absolutely. I want to talk about the next film and put it a little bit in context. We're back to Universal Classics of The Invisible Man. Now, what people, people know that actors were under contract, and Lugosi's contract was dropped after Murders in the Rue Morgue was not a success. So when they were developing The Invisible Man, they were developing it, and there's all sorts of memos. They were developing it for Karloff. Karloff was going to play The Invisible Man, but Universal had that shutdown, and which made him go off to the UK to visit with family and celebrate who he had become after plugging along for 15, 20 years in Hollywood, and to rejoin his brothers, and he made a film while he was over there, because there was basically a hiatus at Universal. And he went over to but they did ultimately make The Invisible Man, because Karloff was in a contract dispute with Universal because they didn't want to honor his contract because of the Depression. And he said no, which of course it was not actionable by Universal because they were basically trying to renege on what they had promised him. He said, no, I'm not going to re-sign a lesser contract. And so he stepped away from Universal. Plus that Universal was kind of leaning things up a bit, tightening the belt. So he went off to the UK. So they still did go ahead and make The Invisible Man without Karloff, and they made it with Claude Rains, and the director James Whale, who of course wanted the actor he discovered, Boris Karloff, to play the part. But it's a film that is discussed as both a sci-fi classic, but as a horror classic, because very much in its own way, like King Kong, it scared people. It frightened people. It's sci-fi horror every bit, like Tracy was talking about Alien when she was, in third grade. This film scared people. The idea of someone you couldn't see creeping up, image of him, Billy, you could put that image back up, is a frightening image. This strange man with these, who's wrapped in bandages and hiding out upstairs. What's he up to? It frightened people. It truly did, and certainly how he deals with the antagonist. This whole idea of protagonist, antagonist. hero and villain is very muddy in the last act of this film, because the hero is the hero Jack Griffin, who's mad, who's insane, and his punishment to his enemy is awfully cruel. It's awfully cruel. So it's you as a child watching the film, like discovering twisted morality for the first time, in usually clean cut scenarios of good versus evil. I think it was a Stan or just Stan. Go ahead.
I have a theory about this, and I'm not just making this thing up. It goes back to the silent era. We generally are born with 5 senses. When one of the senses is stilled, the other senses become more heightened. So in silent film, you don't hear their voices, but you feel the emotion, and your mind picks it up and fills it in. In Frankenstein, we don't hear the monster, but we understand him, and we pay more attention to him. Same as King Kong. He doesn't talk, but we're trying to figure out him. In Invisible Man, we can't see him, so we're very unsure. So we are very heightened. And that's why, for my money, The Invisible Man overall may be the scariest one of all the pre-code Universal films, because we don't know what's happening, because we've all imagined if we were somewhere and there was an invisible person and you got hit, where'd that come from? It's
Tracy, then Justin?
Yeah.
Also, as a kid, I vividly remember it was Claude Rains' laugh. That maddening laugh, like, was just so scary, and you couldn't see him, and then you'd hear that, and it just the unraveling in the mirror, and it still holds up, that sequence. Plays the way, I mean, it's an elegant way that they fix that in a practical way. Man, that laugh.
Yep, absolutely. Justin?
No, I think Tracy's absolutely right. I mean, it helps that Claude Rains has such an exquisite voice. That great. Back when actors generally smoked, which actually really helped their voices, and it's in that wonderful period where Whale was doing all those great horror comedies or horror films with comic elements. You know, Old Dark House is probably the funniest of the lot, and parts of Invisible Man are very funny, like where he's saying, "Here we go, gathering nuts in May, nuts in May," nuts, all that stuff. And of course in Bride of Frankenstein. But I have to say, from a personal standpoint, I have to say, though, in terms of the humor, I'm so glad he keeps the use of Una O'Connor to a minimum, because he goes nuts with her in Bride of Frankenstein, and I just want the monster to murder her. That might be sacrilege, but she is so unfunny in most of
It's sacrilege. It's sacrilege.
She's great in Invisible Man, but in Bride of Frankenstein, it's like, oh Lord.
Well,
please.
we'll talk about that the next episode. We may have to mute you at that point.
It's a little camp.
I love Una O'Connor. And
you can have her. Enjoy.
He will hand it to you on a platter.
And I must say,
Perry.
Yeah, Tracy, real quick. We have a fan, I think.
Okay.
I never get my name with even a single exclamation mark, except from Stan, God bless him. Perry, what were you saying?
This is going back to something Stan said, and then something you said, Steve. Stan, correct me if I'm wrong, but Universal did not have their own theater chains either, did they?
No.
No. So these films had to have played in independent theaters to be seen, right?
Yeah, as a matter of fact, when they were re-released, I mean, we can talk about that later on, when they did the double bill of Dracula and Frankenstein, Universal executives had to run to the theaters. They said, what's going on? It was like, it was a stampede. And that's what started the second wave of the horror. Yeah, they did their own.
And then something, Steve, you were talking about Griffith killing Kemp. And, as a kid, that was, to me, one of the most disturbing parts of the movie is how matter of fact.
Yeah.
His vocal range is so great in this film, but in that particular sequence, he's like, "Here's what I'm going to do. You're going to do this. We're going to break your neck, and you're going to please." He's like, "No, too late." Like he's just so matter of fact.
Yeah, and he's not. There's no twist. He does the thing he said he's going to do. That's what he does.
There's no negotiating. He's just like, "This is going to happen."
Yeah.
I just think
it is because he is a human being who, yes, through a drug this has happened, but on a bigger sense, on a metaphorical sense, it's like, oh, what happens when you don't care? When you what happens when just your pure basic instincts take over? Because everybody watching the movie, man, woman, or child, watches it and goes, I've remembered wanting someone dead. I've remembered wanting it, but he just does it. And it's fascinating because the drug, impedes those governing senses. But it's amazing to watch, and the glee with which he does it. That's what Tracy's talking about, his laughter, which is not gratuitous. It's all part of the story.
And then also the lead up to that scene, I think, is equally terrifying, where he says, "I was with you when you changed into your police uniform."
Oh, yes.
They thought that they were safe, but he's like, "No, I was there for that whole thing." That to me, it just is scary in and of itself, because your mind backtracks and goes, "Oh my God, he heard all that and saw all that." And,
absolutely.
Yeah, I love the way the film begins.
Mm-hmm.
Where you see the snow, you see the guy walking, but then it goes into the tavern, and you see the guy playing the piano, and everyone thinks he's playing it.
Mm-hmm.
And then someone puts a coin in, and it starts playing without him. Who would have expected that in a horror sort of film?
James Well.
It's magnificent.
Yeah, it was wonderful how he grew into, because of the economics of how well he did for the studio, how more he was able to continue to express his voice, continue to express his fascinating ability to fuse horror, comedy, subversiveness, perversity, charm, and wit, and of course, and we'll talk more about that in a later show, all coming together with Bride of Frankenstein. And as we end this decade, it's not a film that's particularly good, but it's kind of fascinating on a historical, in terms of its place in history. It's a film I alluded to when Karloff went off to the UK and made this movie for Gaumont called The Ghoul, which is fascinating because so many of the Universal horror films took place in Europe, and they're American made. So Karloff goes over to the UK, and the UK not looking to, they're making their pretty much the first British horror film, but their mindset wasn't, we'll make the first British horror film. We have to make a film like they make in the US. So there they are in the UK trying to emulate a Universal picture. It's beautiful to look at. The photography is wonderful. It has this glorious cast: Ernest Thesiger, Sir Cedric Hardwicke, Ralph Richardson in a role that gets more interesting as the film goes on. Karloff, but it's a total problem script-wise, because you don't bring Karloff. Great, we got Karloff to do a British movie, and then have him in the first 15 minutes, and then not have him in again until 50 minutes into the movie. It's like out of the movie for 40 minutes, which makes it makes zero sense. But go ahead, Tracy.
Also, I think in all of cinema history, there's a couple really tragic cases of false eyebrows. And I would argue Karloff in The Ghoul and Morgan Freeman in Dreamcatcher are at loggerheads about who wore it worse. It's off the charts ridiculous to waste him this way.
Yeah.
But it's like also that whole, like, here's the guy from like The Mummy, but it's also like we're 10 or 11 years away from Carter discovering King Tut. So it's almost like they're still trying to milk that Egyptian kind of love. So it feels a little too late. And then Universal's already made such amazing horror movies, many with Karloff. And then there's the UK, as you're saying, the American thing. So they're just a little bit late with the intent of this.
Yeah.
And you waste Karloff the uncanny.
Yeah, and all these scenes of these other characters, and but I'll tell you, one of the things watching it, and this goes to stuff we've been saying on this show about Karloff and his magnificence, is when he comes in the last 15 minutes or so, back into the picture in the last 15, 20 minutes, he has no dialogue. And there's a scene where he's finally at the altar with this thing that he has to give to the Egyptian god.
Anubis.
And the camera's like this on him. It's like, finally this movie comes alive. He's incredible. He's just selling it and delivering, and it's so powerful, and it's wordless, and it's the highlight of the movie. And a movie that you sit there and go, it's almost like they didn't like Gaumont didn't realize Karloff's coming. Do we have any scripts we can use? Maybe this one. And instead of retooling it, like, dude, you got Karloff. Retool this script to actually use him in the picture.
Did anyone else understand, just from a plot standpoint? Because I thought the whole setup was, okay, here's this like eternal light jewel. You got to bury me with this so I can come back to life, and then I'll give it to Anubis, and his hand will do this, and I'm golden. But like that doesn't happen. They steal the jewels. He wakes up anyway.
He's alive anyway.
the moon on the tomb with the thing or whatever the line is, and then
The
I'm like,
moon on the tune with the thing.
I was like,
The pestle with the pestle and the flagon with the dragon.
and he's got super strength, and he's able to open the bars. Like, where did that come from?
I was like, how did he come back to life? I thought we needed the thing, and then I got really confused. And then the eyebrows come back. And
I think one of the maddening things about that movie is you would see stills from it in like Peter Heining's The Ghouls, or you'd see it in Famous Monsters or whatever, and you think, God, this looks great. The Ghoul, Karloff's robbing graves, he's eating human bodies. Like, wow, this is going to be like the sick Birkin hair thing. And you see it and you go, it's like it looks good, but where's it going?
Yeah,
you know?
Absolutely.
You know, Karloff made so many.
There's
so
like
many movies
with a
were
key.
just-
There's like it's like a regular key, but it's a huge tomb door. I'm like, how's the clock work? Like it's like set piece. I'm like, that doesn't work.
But whenever the good thing is it's so beautifully cast. Except, I mean, although there was this trope that existed in the 30s in England of and they knew it, the really annoying, sarcastic, pithy young male lead who insults everybody, and that's supposed to be charming, I think. And he's not quite that charming. Stan, did you want to add something about the Ghoul?
No, I was talking about the Ghoul was the first picture that Karloff made where it looked like he didn't even read the script.
Yeah.
And he had many more movies like that throughout his career. Even when there was 3 days left on his contract with Corman, and he made Terror. I mean, he would just do it for the dough. In other words. And
He wouldn't phone it in, though. That's the beautiful thing. He would do his role. He would do his job. Speaking of doing their job, Billy, I think I don't think we're going to go past 1933. I think this is. I think this is where we're going to call it on November 25th, 1933. T. Hayes Hunter, who apparently was as tyrannical as Stroheim, just not as talented. What I've read, the director of The Ghoul. But we have covered quite an incredible terrain tonight. I once again, I am in awe of this panel. Tracy, thank you for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
Being an equal part of this group. I think the good thing about not a good thing for the year itself, but 34 just has 4 titles, and maybe we'll piggyback 34 onto 35 and have a show for our next one. But I want to thank everybody for wait a minute, 34. Weren't we going to end with December? We were going to end with December.
Well, are we
34?
Are we going to get to December, or should that be its own show? I mean, we could do it, the Wednesday before Thanksgiving or something.
Why don't we lead off? With December 1934 when we come back? Because I don't want to rush through.
Yeah, I don't want to rush through
creepy movie as the one that we're not saying the name of.
Yes,
right.
We're not saying the name.
It seems like what we should be doing is we should be doing one episode of A Century of Horror for each year, and we can have 100 episodes.
Yeah.
It's feeling that way because I got to say we're not vamping and we're not padding. We're actually just telling things that people should know and hear, and that's just where we go, especially during these chock full of interesting years. I want to thank everybody who's been on. Tracy, Justin, Stan, Perry, and co-host Billy Tucci. Glorious job being both co-host on air and the magician behind the scenes, the man behind the curtain. Thank you so much for doing it. Thank you, everybody who has tuned in. Keep tuning in. If we had a problem with it actually airing on Facebook, it exists on YouTube. We'll make sure people see it and it shows up where it needs to show up for all of you to see. Because it definitely still lives on YouTube, and we'll share that link. Watch it.
And yes, and I don't. Please, I just had such a delightful time. I would hope you would all join us again as we hit with maybe 1934. Maybe we'll have a little powwow and just do one show on 1934. Because
it may not be enough films, but we'll talk about it.
34, 35 is tremendous.
34 into 35. I think we do that.
35 is a tremendous year. Yeah.
And somebody's going to say, Happy Halloween, everybody.
Yeah.
It's Halloween tomorrow.
Yes. Happy Halloween to all of you.
So,
enjoy it. It's almost Halloween on the East Coast. So have a great time. Frighten as many people as you can and enjoy yourself. Stan has gone into some strange black ether.
Wow. I regret it.
The blue circle of death.
All right, Billy, you can take us out with the Pop XP logo.
I will. Yeah, everybody, this was wonderful. Thank you all for joining us. Happy Halloween.
Happy Halloween.
Stephen, of course, as always. Well done. I'll talk to you. I'll talk to you in a little bit. Stan, of course, thank you so much. Lou, if you saw Lou's email, it's in the comments over there. You'll be able to get his email address so you guys can reconnect. Tracy, this was a delight to meet you.
Thanks for having me, guys.
Yep,
It was a pleasure, Tracy. Pleasure.
Yes, it was. And of course, Perry and Justin, my bros. I even have a statue of the Invisible Man that I wanted to. I'm like, man, I could have set up my own green screen. I have the Blevins Media Center green screen, and I should have just put some Ace bandages on and had a green board. I could have bought
There was a statue, an award that was given out by a science fiction society in LA called the Invisible Little Man Award. And it's just a base with two little footprints. And I have George Powell's Invisible Little Man Award, and I treasure it. It's like the most wonderful, whimsical little thing.
Maybe we'll get to Werewolf of London next time.
I love it.
Yeah. Oh, that's amazing.
Happy Halloween to you, FizzPop1. Thank you, K80 Stormrider, for saying that we are all great. We try hard. Happy Halloween, Timothy, online. Thank you, everybody. Good night, 16mm film. Sleep well. Enjoy.
Salute. Thank you, everybody. We'll see you guys soon on the Pop XP. Bye-bye.
Hey everyone, thank you for joining us on Pop XP. If you haven't already, make sure to click that subscribe button and also click the bell for notifications when we go live and we upload some awesome new content. Also, don't forget to head on over to Twitter and follow us at the Pop XP and over on Instagram at the Pop XP. Thanks again everyone, and we'll see you soon.